Hello, and welcome to this discussion about the role of water and water research in achieving sustainable development. My name is Sasha, and I have some great panelists with me today who are going to be discussing how their research addresses urgent global challenges related to water availability, access, and quality. We are at the University of Victoria, and we acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich people whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So, why do we study water? Well, water is central to all life on Earth and is critical to meeting UN targets for sustainable development. 2 billion people globally, or about 1 in 4, currently lack access to safely managed drinking water services. Sustainable Development Goal number 6 aims to reduce this number to 0 in the next 8 years. Although the role of water is most evident in SDG number 6, water is crucial for achieving most, if not all, of the SDGs. As this photo of the Nile River demonstrates, water is necessary for life on land. Water is also used for the irrigation that is needed to produce food for the ever-growing population of the Earth. But this leads to reductions in the quantity and quality of water available for humans and for the environment. Focusing on health, waterborne diseases are the 8th leading cause of death globally and the 5th leading cause of death for children under the age of 5. The image on the screen shows how crucial water is for the natural world. But if we look at the Nile River at night, it's obvious that water is equally crucial for society. We have with us today Kelsey Shaw, Camille Zimmer, Xander Huggins, and Chinshu Mohan. These experts are connected by our central theme of water. Their research spans issues from water quality to quantity, from human to environmental impacts, and from community and individual scales to the global scale. We're going to start off with a question. Given that the SDGs are global goals, does that mean we need global scale research? We'll start with Kelsey. If you can describe your research and how it fits into the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. So before I start, just to give everyone a bit of a background, so I am a current master's student in Dr. Caetano Doria's research group here at UVic in civil engineering. I started my master's 2 years ago, and specifically what I focus on is sanitation and looking at decentralized sanitation systems and how that interacts here in Victoria, but also globally. So I think if we think about sort of the question and how SDGs are global goals and thinking about global research, for me specifically, I think that's very impactful. My research is kind of at the intersection of sustainability, environmental engineering, and public health. And for me, my research is very much at a local level. So I look at decentralized sanitation systems, specifically septic tank systems here on Vancouver Island. But many people around the world use these decentralized sanitation systems in all different countries and contexts. So the results that I generate from my research, although very local, can also be applied globally. So yeah, I think that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. So we'll move on to Camille.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. Okay, so my name's Camille Zimmer. I'm a third-year PhD student at UVic, also in the same group as Kelsey, under Dr. Caetano Doria in the Public Health and Environmental Engineering Lab. So my research, similar to Kelsey's, lies at the intersection of public health and environmental engineering, but I study drinking water as opposed to sanitation. So I study specifically very small scale drinking water treatment systems. So things that you might use in places where the household water supply is either not tap water, so not piped, or that water supply is suspect. So the water that's coming out of the tap is not trustworthy. So you might use a filter or chlorine drops or UV treatment to have that extra step of protection. So specifically, my research focuses on, so for my data collection this summer, I camped out on the Juan de Fuca Trail for 2 months of the summer on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And I interviewed 145 backpackers who were hiking the Juan de Fuca Trail. And I tested their water treatment devices to see how well they're working. So those personal water treatment devices that backpackers use to keep themselves safe from waterborne illness while they're hiking. So similar to Kelsey's, my research is quite small scale. It's pretty much the smallest scale water treatment you can have. But I think, and I hope, just like every researcher hopes, that it'll have more applicability than just what I did this summer. So that method of testing water treatment devices as they're being used by regular people in the field, that's brand new. So usually those devices, those water treatment devices, would be tested in a lab with a science nerd like me operating them perfectly in a very clean environment. But then when you are in the field, you're tired, your hands are dirty, whatever, those devices don't work as well. So what I'm hoping is that what I did this summer to test them in the field as they're being used by regular people, that could be applied at a more global scale, because nearly 1 billion people in the world use small scale point of use water treatment technologies as kind of the last barrier to protect themselves against waterborne illness. So yeah, I do operate at the very small scale, but the hope is that it applies at a broader scale.
So we'll move on to Xander now, if you can describe your research and talk about how it relates to issues of scale.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sasha. So yeah, my name is Xander. I'm a PhD student, co-supervised at UVic by Tom Gleason, and our group, we call ourselves the Groundwater Science and Sustainability Research Group. And I'm also co-supervised by Jay Familietti at the University of Saskatchewan. So this will be the first sort of big contrast in this panel discussion, but I focus usually at the global scale. And I'd like to sort of frame my work as I look at the global groundwater sustainability problem space through an explicitly social ecological systems perspective. Yeah, so some of the work I've done on that has been identifying hotspot basins of social and ecological impacts from the spatial co-occurrence of freshwater stress and losses in freshwater storage, which in the subhumid to arid regions mostly is groundwater depletion. And I think a lot of the other work I've done we can tease out throughout this conversation, but I think the point I want to get across about the question is that all scales are super important, and that includes the global scale. And so I think how those scales and the work at those scales mesh together and integrate will be sort of great to talk about. But yeah, that's sort of if the question is sort of, is global scale research important? I say yes, but it's not exclusively the only scale that matters.
Great, thank you, Xander. We'll move on to Chinshu.
Thanks, Sasha. So just a little bit of introduction about myself. I'm Chinshu Mohan, and I'm a postdoctoral research working with Tom Gleason and Jay Familietti. So me and Xander work with the same group. So my research focus is mostly on large-scale hydrology with a special focus on sustainable groundwater management. And I do my research from regional to global scale. And it has special focus on the anthropogenic effect on the groundwater, and also how that is affecting the related aquatic ecosystems. So I totally agree with what Xander had said. It's always a balance between the global and the local scale work we can address, or like we can fulfill the SDG goals. Because in my research, I had seen that the global scale is super important to get a bird's eye view about a lot of issues, especially when it comes to transboundary aquifer problems, For example, like there is a huge aquifer that is shared between two countries, that is India and Pakistan, where the political tension is pretty high. So we cannot expect to have like a local scale study and to have a combined effort to answer the questions of the entire aquifer. So we might need like a higher level study or a global collaboration to address those kind of problems. At the same time, in my research, where I looked at the environmental flow relationship with the aquatic response or aquatic ecosystem response, then we found that like the heterogeneity of the systems are also really important in answering certain type of questions. So in a global study, we make certain assumptions, and we may not be able to have like all the details of individual cases. So in that case, we may actually miss out some information as well. So as like Sandra had mentioned before, it's not a question of whether global study is good or local study is good. It's a question, the real question is, how do we integrate them together to reach these goals? Yeah, thanks.
Of course, thank you, Chinshu. Can you just explain what you mean by environmental flows and impact on aquatic systems?
Sure. So recently, like maybe like 30 years back or like 40 years back, we started to realize that we are not giving enough water for the ecosystems or like dependent ecosystem. So previously, the water that is allocated considered only the human needs, but not the ecosystem needs. Then there was a huge movement to bring more attention to this aspect, and several legalization had brought about to maintain a minimum flow in the streams so that the basic functionality of the ecosystem is met. And the estimate of this minimum flow is often debated, and there are some generalized estimates, and there are several ways of estimating it. So what I was looking into is whether these low flows or the minimum flow that we are recommending is enough to maintain the ecosystem functionality. And in that case, if we are making a global scale estimate, then what happens is individual species respond different to different type of conditions. And for different cases, like different basins or different hydroclimatic conditions, the response will be different. So in that case, we might need a more detailed study, and we have to include a lot of like details into it.
Yeah. Right, thank you. What is actually the role of engineers, and should they be focusing on purely technical solutions to these global problems?
I love what Xander said about no panaceas. I always think it's no pancreas, which is not what the word is. That is like the no silver bullet is like what my PhD is based on. Like previously, point of use technology, like it was thought of as like a silver bullet. You're like, oh, hey, these people don't have access to clean water. We'll just like give them this filter and it'll be fine. And it works. The filter works perfectly well. We tried it in the lab. It's great. And then you give it to them and they're like, it's not the right thing. It breaks. For whatever, like many reasons, it doesn't work the way that it's intended, probably because it's not the appropriate technology solution. And so that is the case of engineers, like being in the lab, being really technical, being like, this should work. I did the calculations. This is great. And then handing the technology off and it being not as great, because I think it goes back to those voices in the room. If you aren't doing the work, doing the applicability studies and talking to the people who are going to be using whatever you're coming up with, it's a recipe for disaster. Like it's not going to work. So yeah. And the other thought I have on this, like thinking about engineers, is just the fact that we need to be better at communicating what we're doing to lay people and to the people who are going to be using our technology. Like it's just, even myself, like I find it so hard. It's so hard. It's so challenging to have like these like years of only talking with your computer and doing calculations, and then all of a sudden you need to like be a human and explain your work to someone, and explain why it's important and explain what they need to get out of it. And also maybe what you think, it's also like an ego thing. Like you think that it's really great, and then you've worked like years on it, and then the use is maybe not there, and that it, I don't know, we just need to kind of get over ourselves a little bit as engineers. Like I think we're just taught so much, we're conditioned. I don't know about anyone else, but like when I was in my bachelor's, we were conditioned like everyone had a huge ego and we thought that we all knew everything, and it's like really a culture thing. And so I think we just need to let go of our egos a little bit more and let other voices into the room, because it's so valuable. Those are my thoughts.
If I can jump in, I think that's great, Camille. I would characterize my graduate student experience as sort of a parallel process of learning and unlearning. And I think what you're talking about sort of this engineer's ego and this techno optimism, and just give it to an engineer and the problems will be solved. And unlearning that has been as important, I think, to sort of my growth in my as a researcher in person and whatnot. And I actually think that this question dovetails really nicely with the first one on scale, because I'll give almost the same answer. I think engineering is super important, but I don't think it's the only profession or skill set at all that matters in addressing these global goals. And I think understanding the advantages and the many skills that engineers have is important and are necessary in developing these solutions, but also identifying the sort of the blind spots, or sort of what engineers and engineering students, I should talk. I'm not an engineer. I have an engineering degree, but I'm not a PEng by any means. So that's my position. And I would say that sort of problem definition might not be one of the skills that's often sort of cultured in an engineering undergraduate. It's sort of, here's a problem that's presented to you and let's solve it sort of, from a number of sort of optimization procedures or for a number of criteria and constraints. But this gets back to what we were talking about earlier about sort of who's in the room and how problems are defined. And in my undergraduate, sort of the template for answering any question was, we used the acronym GRASP. So given, required, defined, assumptions, your solution, and then you paraphrase. But those givens, required, defined, and assumptions are probably more important than the solution and the paraphrasing in the sort of the grand scheme of things. And so, yeah, I could keep going on about this, but I just think that it's engineers aren't the local or global scale, but it's similar in the sense that skills need to work together. And as engineers, we need to, or as people with engineering training, and similarly analytical sort of thinking skills, to work more and integrate more with other people who are so smart and know things and see the world just in different ways, but those need to be complementary and reconciled. So yeah, that's my initial response.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Chinchu, maybe we can just get your perspective on this in terms of taking, these very complex systems and then reducing them to something that is interpretable to policy, like the planetary boundaries for freshwater, which is this very, very simple way of communicating with people who influence policy.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that's the most trickiest part with science. Like as scientists or engineer, our day-to-day life is in details. But when it comes to the end user, they don't want details. And that's a hard truth we have to accept. And it took a while for me to accept that, because when I was talking to some of the, and I won't call this end users, but more like the actual people who make the decisions, then when I start talking about the calibration, validation, etc., I'm like, what? No, we don't want to hear any of these things. tell me where it fits in the grand scheme and how we can directly apply it to our community. So that was their question. So I think that is super important as engineer or scientist to start thinking about it right from we frame the question or research question or set the research objective. So speaking of the planetary boundary project, I think that's a very interesting project where like different scientists and different communities come together, and it's a very multidisciplinary group, and they are trying to simplify the Earth system level processes to a threshold, a number, which is incredibly challenging and it's still ongoing. But the advantage of that is it is so much easier to communicate to a UN or any national agency and say that if you go beyond this number, we are in danger. If you stay within this, we are okay, we can manage. So that way, simplifying that science in a digestible format is like really important. And I'm sad to say that often we fail to do that in a proper way, or we didn't reach up to what it has to be simplified. But yeah, that's something that's very important in dealing with any earth system or environment or sustainability problems.
How would each of you evaluate the impact of your work beyond academia? What would make you say, that was a successful project and I really had a beneficial impact on the world?
That is such a good question. And I feel like it's also a question that like literally keeps me up at night. So I'm just gonna start because I just started talking. But yeah, I think that's such a hard question to answer, because I feel like for myself personally, as a researcher and as someone working in kind of like a public health lens, looking at sort of water and sanitation and how that interacts locally and globally, we all just like want to have an impact. And I think all of us here in like this virtual room that we're in, and all of us who are watching this today, like all of our intentions and motivations are in a good place, but it's that those links between like intention and action that I think research in an ideal world is supposed to like build that bridge between sort of intention and action. And it's something that I struggle with in terms of gauging if that's actually happening or not. And I think also it's about setting sort of like realistic goals and having realistic indicators. So I think like when we talk about SDGs in sort of like a broad sense, there's all of these like indicators that are set to measure like progress for SDGs, and ultimately like our research would be a part of these indicators. And I think for me, that's kind of what I focus on is, how, if I look at my work and my contributions kind of from start to end and think about how that maps with indicators within the SDGs and how those are going kind of start to end, I think that's how I quantify impact. But then on the flip side, on like a very personal level, if I have a really inspiring conversation with someone that I meet in the field, or a really inspiring like interaction with someone after I give like a seminar, to me, sometimes that actually feels way more impactful than like being able to publish a paper that addresses the SDG. So I think it's a bit of a combination of both. And I think maybe, and this is my personal opinion, but maybe as researchers, we should be striving for both, for like those sort of like classical, impactful, like, I have all this data, this feeds into this bigger project and this bigger goal, but then also like having those like 10-15 minute interactions with people who you never would have met before, or who are now super interested in your work or can apply it in their community. Like, I think it needs to be a bit of both to feel like you're having impact, or to have impact. I don't know. Pass it off to someone else.
Yeah, thank you.
I can jump in there next. I think when I started my research career, what I was having in mind as an impact is like my research inspiring some policymaker and making a huge change in the world. Then later I realized that's never going to happen, or it may happen in the future, but that doesn't undermine my work. So I think every person who steps into the research have this idea in mind and always struggle to appreciate the real impact, or the impact their research is making in the science community, or in like the beneficiary community. So what I count as a win is if something that I find, or like something that I find in my research, inspires another person to think about a question slightly differently, then I count it as a win. It could be like another researcher, or it could be another policymaker, and it can be just one drop in the ocean, but that still makes a huge contribution. And at a personal level, I would say that when I talk about my research to another person, maybe from a scientific community or outside the scientific community, and that made them think like, okay, I should use water in a different way. Like I'm not using it properly, or I'm wasting water. Then that gives me the most satisfaction, I'd say. Yeah. Thank you, and I'll pass it to someone else.
I'll just add a short reflection, because I sort of completely agree with what Chinchu and Kelsey just said, and sort of making notes from some of the questions that you sent around, Sasha. I just had a number of question marks underneath this one, because I think it's one definitely that we all struggle with. So the only thing I'll say is that whenever I think about impact, I always think about trying to have an ethos of, like treading softly or treading lightly, and trying to foster in myself and maybe those that I collaborate with sort of an intentionality of the impact, and sort of with the thinking that not having a negative impact is better. So sometimes doing nothing, which I don't really mean do nothing in your days, but identifying sort of the point of impact for the sake of impact, I think is sort of antithetical to sort of the whole sustainability movement and trying to address the global goals and whatnot. So just my only reflection is sort of thinking about researchers as a part of society, and trying to untether sort of ego and how do I impact the world, and sort of how can I fit into a system and a community that's trying to impact the world, is hard, and it challenges sort of career trajectory, just how you like in terms of if people want to sort of get professor positions and whatnot, right? Like there are ways that impact's measured that are systematic and are certainly have footing, but might not map out to how to address the global goals. So I'm raising that tension, but I think that whenever I think about impact, I also think about sort of, is my impact also in the direction that I want it to be going in? And sort of, sometimes publishing or just sort of saying stuff for the sake of saying it. And I think, Kelsey, you're talking about this earlier, right? In terms of like the amount of space that engineers and engineering trained people take up in the room, right? That's something to think about as well. So so I agree with what everyone said so far, but also just reflecting on the if we should do stuff as well is just as important in my mind.
Camille, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you guys just like all hit the nail on the head so well. The only thought that I had is like, I feel like what impact isn't is like the number of publications you have on Google Scholar, you know, or like how many citations you get. And for some reason, that's like how researchers are evaluated. And it's just, it's too bad. Yeah.
That could be a whole other 2 hours.
That is a whole other panel discussion.
So just to wrap up here, I'll ask you all what your favorite part of your research is and what you're kind of excited for going forward in the next year. Maybe we'll start with Camille.
I like so many things about research, and you know, selfishly, I really like a lot of things about my research. I really enjoy how hands-on like it can be, and seeing the kind of the direct results of the thing that you did is, I mean, we talked about ego, that's definitely an ego thing, but it is very gratifying. And sort of on the flip side of that, like collaborating with others, like what we're doing right now is really also one of my favorite parts of research. So yeah, having hands-on and seeing the fruits of your labor, hopefully, and then also working with people, it's just so great. Yeah.
Thank you, Camille. Maybe we'll move on to Kelsey.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Camille actually stole one of mine, so now I have to think of a different one. I really do love collaborating with people, but I think more and more what I've realized about my work and what I do and what like really motivates me a lot of the time is like continuously being challenged by my peers and by people in and out of my field. And like, I don't know, I think it took me a while to get used to like being told that I was wrong, which I don't think anyone likes at first. And if they do say that, then I think they're probably lying. But I think, yeah, something that I really like about this is just like being challenged by people and like meeting people with different perspectives and just like constantly learning about myself as well as learning about my research at the same time. I think is something that's really unique to doing research, and I'm really happy about that and looking forward to more of it. So
That's great. Thank you, Kelsey. Move on to Xander.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. I thought this was a great conversation. So just in reflection, this is one of the things that I love about research, like Camille was saying, is conversations like this and collaborations internally, internationally, people you meet is wonderful. The only thing I'll add is what I love about research, and I should say like research as a PhD student, is that it feels like an infinite space to grow into. And I just think that's such a lovely place to exist in. And I don't know really any other places where you could find that. So being able to be curious and explore, you know, however you see fit is just such a wonderful thing. And to be surrounded by smart people that struggle with the same questions and can guide you towards things, it's just such a lucky place to be in. So yeah, good feelings all around.
Very
Pass
cool.
it to Chinchu.
For me, it's constantly challenging, and there is, as like all three of you said, like there is space to improve and learn and develop every single day, both professionally and personally. I really enjoy that, and I really love that aspect of research, that every day I learn something new. It might be like a teeny tiny thing one day, but still it's always in the positive direction. It never steps back or like comes in the other way around. And specifically about the environmental research I'm doing is more relatable, and it gives me a sense of satisfaction that I'm doing something that contributes to a bigger good, and something that every person who is currently living in Earth and will live in the Earth in the future will be benefited from, like all of us are doing now. So yeah, that's what excites me about the research. Over to you, Sasha.
Great, thank you all. This has been a really great conversation, and I look forward to seeing your research over the next few years and reading about it and seeing the products. So thank you to Camille, Kelsey, Xander, and Chinchu for joining our panel discussion today.